Welcome to the Amen Podcast, where all men from all walks of life, backgrounds, and ages can obtain the tools on how to become alpha men from a Christ-centered perspective in today's society. Here's your host, Jimmy Greer.
So, I was thinking about this topic, everybody, when the culture that we're in today, the society that we're in today is much different than we were even 5 years ago. And one of the topics that is completely just infiltrated all of our social media sites, our conversations at work and our conversations wherever we're going out and about, is about immigration, and it's about ICE. And I understand that there's a lot of people out there with different opinions, both sides of the opinion of that it is right or that it is wrong or that it is unfair or it is unlawful. And so today, I'm really excited about this topic because the intention of this episode is to get factual information and not just opinions, not interpretations of what we're seeing in the news or in a story, and grabbing that piece of information and then making it a truth. So today, again, I want to welcome back Sheriff John Zenoni, Fresno County. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
Yeah. And then we have a good friend of mine as well, Rick Field, a trainer extraordinaire, just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to CCW, training tactics, freedom firearms. It's good to have both sides of these aisle because it's going to bring in the civil side of this, and it's also going to bring in the citizen patriot side of this, and how we should respond responsibly to this topic and actions as a CCW holder and as a citizen. So one of the things, guys, I want to get into today is first question out. To the best of your knowledge, Sheriff, what is the function of ICE? I know that there's a lot of interpretation and emotions flaring, thinking that there is this way or that way. From what you know.
Well, I think when you look at ICE, I did a bit of research, and obviously it's the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And their job is really to protect America through criminal investigations and also through enforcing immigration laws. They're focusing on national security, they're focusing on public safety, and maintaining the integrity of our immigration system, which is really important when we talk about national security within the United States. One thing I want to touch on is their mission with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, changed after 9/11, and I believe in 2003, because of the threat and everything that happened with 9/11, they really focused more on immigration enforcement and individuals who were undocumented and were not legally here within the United States. That became their focus after 9/11. So I just kind of want to get that out there. So they've been around, for years, and even though their focus changed, they were around a long, long time before 2003. And then when you look forward, even when Obama was president, I believe somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 million people were deported or taken off the streets by the Obama administration. And Mr. Holman, who's running the show now, I believe got an award from President Obama. So I'm trying to figure out in my mind what's really changed. A lot of people were taken off the streets, and yet he was commended for it. And now we've gone the other direction. And is this sort of a referendum on Trump, or is it because of a couple isolated incidents that happened, and now we don't like ICE? We villainized ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Yeah, that is so well put, because when we look at this, we see it in the news, what the news reports. We have the conversations personally with other people. And then there's the responsibility of the citizen on how they're going to respond with that. It is calling good bad. And that's biblically sound, because God said that in the last days what's going to happen is that people will call things that are morally good and right bad. And these people are standing up for what? Right things, injustice. They're doing their jobs, and people are trying to keep them from doing that. So now that we've said that, so let's take it to the citizen patriot side, the CCW holder, and how do we respond to that? What's the right stance in that to the ICE agent that might be out in our neighborhood, that might be out conducting investigations from your perspective, Rick?
Well, first and foremost, when you're a CCW permit holder, good moral character is just, good judgment. Not putting yourself into a situation that either leads you to obstructing justice and not allowing the police to do their job, or unlawfully resisting a police officer in the performance of their duties. So just because you have the ability to carry a firearm, one, it doesn't make you any type of law enforcement officer, and it doesn't give the ability to impede law enforcement from doing their job. So to show up to, either a protest armed or something like that, you have to be able to, distinguish what your role is as a CCW permit holder, which is to protect yourself, your family, a third party from, and this is driven from Penal Code 197, from a imminent threat. And imminent, the way that the law defines imminent is it's going to happen. So you're forced to take an action, and it's an action against a deadly threat or a threat of serious bodily injury that is likely to result in death, either to you or a third party that you're protecting. And if it doesn't rise to that level of imminent threat of death or great bodily injury, then you are required by Penal Code 197 to use proportional force. So if you just look at what the law says you can do within the CCW realm, none of that, at no point in that does it include, obstructing justice and stopping a police officer or any, agent, law enforcement agent from doing their job. So I'd like to say use common sense, but in today's world, it doesn't seem like common sense is that common anymore. And in my lifetime, what I'm witnessing is the deepest divide politically, across the United States that I've ever seen in my lifetime. So everybody believes, each side believes that their side is correct, and the result is these protests, and unfortunately, the protests lead to people obstructing and uses of force against those people. It's a bad situation. So I would say, as a CCW permit holder, follow the laws. Be very, very familiar with Penal Code 197 and all that it entails. Be diligent, and also be familiar with Penal Code 26200, which says that as a CCW permit holder, you cannot engage in a law enforcement action or keep a law enforcement individual from doing their job. Now, if the law enforcement individual requests your assistance, that's different.
That's a little different.
That's
story.
different.
Yeah.
And that has happened, a time or two, but that's not what we're talking about here.
So that is good information. I like that, because it's definitely gonna lead into the next segue of this questioning, and it is for you both, and you'll see where to jump in on this. Is that my biggest debate question that I come on when I engage people in this kind of conversation is the understanding of what is the right of a peace officer, law enforcement, in this situation of investigation, arrest, detaining, whatever that process is taking place. They think that it's, and this is public, this is not our perception, but this is public perception, is that it's all wrong and that it's all bad and it's all incorrect because they're not properly informed about what the law says. So the question is, from a law enforcement standpoint, is there similarities, Sheriff, about how if an ICE officer or a Fresno County deputy is actively investigating, what are those parameters that gives him the right to go do what he needs to do?
There are some differences, but what I want to focus on here to the public out there, and this came up the other day when I was making a presentation at the Board of Supervisors, we're so focused on ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They are a federal law enforcement organization.
Correct.
Under Department of Homeland Security. But we have a lot of federal law enforcement organizations. You have DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration. You have the FBI. You have the Secret Service. You
Marshals.
have ATF.
Yeah.
So they are all federal law enforcement officers. This is one group of those federal law enforcement officers. So their ability to investigate, they can investigate a crime. They can investigate immigration-related crimes, but they can also investigate federal crimes. If they're out there and they witness a state crime on the street in California, as a law enforcement officer, they can take action. And what I want to focus on, can they get a search warrant? Yes. Can they arrest people? Yes, they can arrest people.
Do they always need a search warrant, though? Is that's the big topic that a lot of people think. What's that premise?
You do need a search warrant most of the time to do certain things, but when you have a fresh pursuit, or I'll give you the good example that was in our media.
Okay.
You had an individual who was arrested out near Shepherd and Willow.
Okay.
And you had unmarked vehicles there. I know there was somebody said they saw DEA, DHS, ICE, whoever it was. That individual, in a lot of the media articles, was labeled as, well, he's an undocumented individual who's a gardener, and he's been taken into custody by ICE. Well, the minute I saw that, I called up somebody I know at the Department of Homeland Security, and I said, hey, what is the deal with this? Because I don't think this is just an immigration issue.
Right.
And sure enough, that individual got back to me the following day and says, no, he's a sex offender. He has
an ongoing investigation.
No, he has a prior sex offense, and he had come back into the United States, and he was undocumented. So you have someone who's a criminal, who's undocumented, who's here. So it's not just a gardener. Now, how that messaging went out, I think could have been a lot better by the agencies involved, because what you read on the headlines is gardener arrested for immigration violation. Well, no, he's a criminal. And I think that's an important distinction, because what I've been saying all along is there are a lot of really, really good people who are out here who provide necessary services and work here in Fresno County that make our ag industry $8 billion, that work in manufacturing industry. And they've come into this country to chase the American dream.
Agreed.
And I will tell you this, and I've said this to everybody on both sides of the aisle, we have failed these people. How they got in here, that's on us. They're here now. They're paying taxes. They're doing the right thing. They're not committing crimes. Why can't we get them work visas? Why can't we find a way to get them citizenship so they can continue to be positive?
Expedite them.
Right.
Yeah.
Contributing to our society in a positive way, because everybody came here at some point, for the most part, for the American dream. And sometimes, like when my great-grandfather came here, it was hard. I mean, he died at 30-some years old. He worked at coal mines and did, stone work and things like that. Yeah. But we also got to focus on obeying the law. Because remember, being a citizen of this country is an opportunity, and it's a great privilege for what we offer in America. And if people are coming in here illegally and they're transporting fentanyl, they're involved in gangs, or they're doing a lot of these things, sex trafficking, bringing people over, human trafficking from Mexico or whatever country is, China, we can't have that. Okay, that's not being a good American. And when we want people to get citizenship, we want good Americans. And there's a lot of people here who could be good Americans if given the opportunity.
I don't disagree with that at all, and thank you for bringing that up. The way that I view ICE and their operations currently is that they're not targeting, if you will, the person that's over here who's trying to chase the American dream. First and foremost, the priority, from the way that I've seen it, is and understand it, is they are targeting the people that are criminals.
Yes,
those are the priorities. And
I think you make a great point, and I've heard that. The issue is you see these anomalies out there. Well, so-and-so got arrested or taken into custody because it's only an immigration violation. And do I think that occurs? Absolutely. And then I'll just transition back quickly to why I believe that SB 54 actually causes more issues and endangers those individuals who are only here undocumented, because now Immigration and Customs Enforcement, all these federal agencies are out in the community looking for criminals. The issue is when they come across individuals that are not a criminal but are here undocumented, their job is immigration, so they take them into custody. And I call that collateral damage. It is. My theory has always been, if I tell people, if you for the sheriff's office, if you never set foot in our jail, you have nothing to worry about. And I've told, when we're out doing police services for Huron for the last 6 months, you should have nothing to worry about. And I believe that, and we practice that. Now, if you come into jail and you're in for murder or a drive-by shooting or an armed robbery, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement finds out you're in our jail, they send over a transfer request, and it meets the criteria, we're going to complete the transfer if we can because we're complying with federal law and we're complying with state law, which is SB 54.
And that's good. That's good that you mentioned that. And SB 54 is so important because people need to understand what that state bill says and how the law enforcement agencies are acting and responding correctly to the law. They're not going outside their parameters and operating illegally that in the way that everybody's promoting that. Working together, it does not mean that one entity, because that's the viewpoint. The entity is, why aren't you doing something? Why aren't you protecting? You are protecting the citizens within the confines of the law that you've been hired to enforce, and that you yourself have also been hired to train people legally within their rights to operate firearms, when to defend yourself, how to defend yourself, when is it lawful, when is it unlawful. But we've got to break down, and just my own personal opinion here, we got to break down the narrative of let's not jump to demonizing every single aspect as it is against human rights, it is against law, it's not constitutional, because that's really the conversation that everybody is having, right? And they're having it completely just out of concept and out of reality. And I can't wrap my head around it. So
I want to go back to, we talked earlier about common sense.
Sure.
In a CCW situation, use common sense. Well, common sense is a moving target. Can we agree?
Yes.
Yeah, not everybody else is going to see, certain things in a certain way where, somebody else might see it differently. So I want to go back to the law, because the law establishes a reasonable person standard. And the reasonable person standard says, would a reasonable person, when faced with similar facts and circumstances, would they have done the same thing? Right? Mm-hmm. That's the reasonable person standard. That's one of the things that you're going to be challenged against should you use lethal force as a civilian in the community.
Well, and I think it's a great point, Rick. And when we talk about the reasonable standard, at the time that the incident's occurring, so if I'm out here in front of this office building and there's somebody on the street that I need to contact as a law enforcement officer, and we're all working like a detail, right?
Correct.
You're in law enforcement. And there's three of us and there's one person, that's going to be a little different reasonable standard versus there's hundreds of protesters up and down the street.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of other things going on, and we got to watch our back.
Absolutely.
And we're contacting one person where I know from my training and experience that if this goes sideways or this person resists, there's a lot of other people who potentially are threats to me. And that's how we have to. But if it's just one person, the reasonable standard is slightly different. And that's what I want people to understand, is that we've seen a lot of this where, ICE agents are seemingly under attack. Mm-hmm. And I really liked what Kristi Noem did now, is she's mandating them all to wear body cameras. And I think like
that's
we
good.
do, like the Fresno Police Department does, that gives perspective to everyone else out there who's not there with them, who will see what they are going through on a minute, hourly, and daily basis doing their job.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, the fact that, the body cameras are huge, starting to become more
huge tool
by ICE agents. Because if we even dial back to Graham v. Connor, and Graham v. Connor being the case that really establishes how uses of force should be viewed by law enforcement officers. So we talked about the reasonable person standard, and even CCW permit holders are held to the reasonable person standard. And then on the LE side, you have objectively reasonable, right? Mm-hmm. So in part of the objectively reasonable standard, the other portion of that says that when you're looking at the force used by an officer, it has to be viewed by the lens of that officer at the time that they used force, based on the facts and circumstances that officer had in front of them at that time. You can't use the hindsight, i.e. the camera, and going back and watching a video after the fact and making a determination on whether that use of force was good or whether it was unlawful or violated somebody's civil rights.
It's not the NFL.
No, you don't get an instant replay.
You don't get an instant replay
get to judge how a police officer dealt with that situation. It has to be viewed from that officer's standpoint, based off of the facts and the circumstances that officer had at the time.
Here's the unique parallel that you can draw. At the same point that officer has to acquire in their mind, make the decision-making process, the CCW holder in the same exact position, has to assess very quickly all of those parameters to deem that person a threat to use deadly force if so necessary.
Right.
I also think that I'm starting to see this, and you guys can touch on this as well, is that I've never seen in my lifetime where a federal department or division of law enforcement has to have their own protective detail to actually conduct, where the actual detail of team that is conducting the investigation or trying to detain or trying to arrest, trying to go into a neighborhood lawfully, and they have to have their own detail to protect against them. I think
it's
beyond me.
I think when we're talking about that, I was listening to a couple different chiefs across the United States speak, and looking at what happened in Portland, Oregon. There was a shooting there involving a couple individuals, and they turned out to be criminals, and they were undocumented in this country. They were not here legally. And he even brought up that we are a country of laws.
Yes.
We are law and order. And what we have to follow the law, and I'll take it even a step further. We can't let emotions get in the way of whether or not we're going to obey a law, follow a law, or break a law. Because when we let emotions and feelings get in the way,
100%.
we don't think rationally, and then sometimes common sense is out the window.
Couldn't agree more.
And so when you look at a lot of these situations, like, hey, I'm the sheriff of Fresno County. If you want to go out and exercise your First Amendment rights and you want to hold up signs that say end ICE, get ICE out, that is your right. I am going to defend your right to do that. If you peacefully protest in an acceptable manner, yeah. But if you go out and start rioting and start breaking things and breaking the law, then that is not protected by your First Amendment right. And then action will have to be taken because we can't allow that, because we are a country of laws and law and order.
I think this is a good segue to that question that we were just talking about earlier in pre-show. So now we're starting to see, okay, the scenario is you're a citizen at the stoplight, you're a CCW holder, right? You're in, I don't know if I want to even name the school district that I see this in. I think I'm going to stay away from that one. There is a school district in Fresno County that is allowing students that are checked into their system, and meaning that their attendance, and they are in school hours, and they're sitting out there standing with their signs protesting. So they're basically committing truancy at that point that is supported and allowed by those high schools so that they can operate in their First Amendment right, which is just beyond me. So now you've got a scenario where somebody gets in your face, is shaking a sign, is approaching a car, and now you have children at risk that are in the responsibility and care of these school districts. I don't understand how this is even a concept of being okay in the mindset of social justice. It just doesn't make sense to me. So that scenario, somebody's coming up and they're like getting their sign and they're being super aggressive. Mm-hmm. How do we, from the CCW standpoint, I mean, I already know the answer, but I want other people to really wrap their head around this to de-escalate these kinds of situations. What would you say to that?
Well, first and foremost, de-escalation is the perfect word.
Yeah.
So if the individual who comes up with a sign is being aggressive, as you say, if that's met with even further aggression by you, the CCW permit holder, and it's deemed that even though they were the aggressor initially, you then further, were the aggressor and became more of an aggressor than that individual was in the moment, and that led to a use of lethal force, and all the facts and circumstances, during the investigation come out that yes, this person started the aggressor as being the aggressor, but ultimately you furthered the aggression, you didn't de-escalate, and by the way, did you have an avenue of escape? If you had an avenue of escape, did you take it? Here's the thing about California law. There is no stand your ground law in California.
No.
Okay? But California is also not a duty to retreat state. So you can stand and protect yourself. Yeah. I know you're in a big gray area.
Yeah.
And where that lies, where you are able to defend that position, it lies in case law, and it also lies in jury instructions. Mm-hmm. So if you look at jury instructions, and it's jury instructions 505 that cover this type of situation unfolding, right? The problem with that is if you're having to use jury instructions and case law as your defense, you've been charged, right?
Correct.
Because there is no law that tells you that you can do that.
Yeah.
So even though you can stand and defend yourself, there is no stand your ground law. But if you had an avenue of escape and you failed to take it, that is going to come out during the investigation as well.
Yes.
So it comes down a lot to de-escalation, not being the aggressor, taking an avenue of escape, and acting as a reasonable person would.
Well, and I think that's a great point, Rick, is we just touched on a minute ago about emotions and feelings. And I do understand that individuals that are out, that are protesting, that are exercising their First Amendment rights, they feel passionate about this. They're very emotional about this. And the best thing you can do is avoid confrontation. Understand the perspective they're coming from. I mean, if it's just a sign and all they're doing is bouncing it up and down and they're just out there, doing their chant, then take the appropriate action, retreat, go the other way, make a left turn, get through the light.
Absolutely.
Don't engage, because when you engage, it's going to escalate.
Yeah, and I want to bring up brandishing as well, because brandishing is covered under Penal Code 417, right?
Yeah.
So here's what the law says about brandishing. If you brandish a firearm in a rude or angry manner, or in any manner, use or display a threatening manner, use or display the firearm in a fight or quarrel, you are guilty of a crime. So brandishing is okay when you're in a situation where there's an imminent threat of, death or serious vital injury that's likely to result in death. It's the same type of scenario that plays out under Penal Code 197. So you cannot display a firearm to de-escalate a fight or quarrel. That is a crime. And then depending on the precursors and what happens afterwards, is it going to be charged as a misdemeanor? Is it going to be charged as a felony? It could be charged either way. But who wants to roll the dice?
So we're not doing desk pops, is what you're saying?
No, we're definitely not doing desk pops. And by the way, nowhere in the Penal Code, nor do I teach fire warning shots, by the way.
No, sir.
Because you're responsible for every shot that
comes out.
Every round that comes out. And nowhere does it talk about warning shots.
No.
I think, I think that's really good stuff. And I was looking over the list of questions, and one of them talks about, how you inform, support, and protect our loved ones and law enforcement.
That was right where I was
for
going.
would-be rioters and threats. And what can we do to positively,
instruct,
have sort of a to turn some of this into a positive? Because right now, ICE has been villainized and everything that's going on. I mean, they've really, and so what I look at is hey, the agents out there on the streets are no different than our deputies or police officers.
Yeah. Correct.
They didn't make these laws.
No.
They didn't pass these laws. These were passed by Congress and by the Senate, and they were signed into law by a president of the United States. And we touched on earlier that it's gone through, from Bush Jr., we'll call him, to Obama, to Trump, to Biden. Those are the people that, if it's a history lesson, it's a government. They make the laws. Yeah. These individuals are enforcing the laws. And yes, have some things happen that have been questionable with Good being shot in her car and what she was doing, kind of agitating, pulling up by the agents, and then the other individual who was shot and killed. I understand that. But let's not take two situations where obviously a large group of individuals feel that they were absolutely in the wrong and they should be prosecuted, and that's fine. But let's remember there's a lot of things going on out there. There's a lot of different operations with ICE and enforcing immigration. And what I try to tell people is hey, people make mistakes. I mean, people get fired from jobs all the time. I mean, doctors, make mistakes, and sometimes they cost people their lives. They make a bad decision. We see it in the news where doctors have their medical licenses suspended and things. And that's just here locally. I mean, remember, ICE covers the entire United States, and we had some incidents in Minnesota, yes, that are concerning, but let's not blanket and judge everybody who's in that federal law enforcement agency as this. Because there are people out there trying to do their jobs. I mean, there was one in Minnesota who was chasing down a criminal who was undocumented here, and I believe during the chase down, he was actually struck with a shovel, and he got into a shooting. Now, I haven't seen much about that because to me, that's a justified use of force, and that individual did something that caused the agents to react, and that's acceptable. I mean, if someone's hitting you with a shovel,
Which is capable of causing mortal injury or serious bodily
injury.
injury.
A snow shovel at that.
To anybody or an officer. Yeah,
Right. That meets the level of responding with deadly force. So trying to explain to individuals that, police officers make mistakes, deputy sheriffs make mistakes. And sometimes, things happen. We're really scrutinizing this because of how we feel emotionally about this immigration situation in our country. But remember, these are the laws on the books. Right. They're doing a job based on the laws they didn't create these laws. They didn't pass these laws. They're enforcing the law based on their job description.
Right.
Let's talk about agitators and possible threat of escalation. I want to get into that because that seems to be where a lot of the conversation gets into play on both sides of the opinion of this. So using the example that we had earlier, so let's say that scenario of that group turns from, let's say, 3 people, and then suddenly you've got 20 people, which we see that is an aggression that takes place and does take place very quickly.
Yep.
So now you've got mob impact taking place, and people are rocking cars, throwing bricks, whatever, or actually physically trying to shake cars. We've seen that. And then the physical attack on the officer. And this is taking place not just in downtown, this is taking place in communities. So how do we respond to that from law enforcement aspect, and how do we respond to that? I don't want to be redundant in this, but how do we respond to that in that scenario as citizen, as a CCW holder? Whoever wants to go first on that one.
So with law enforcement, when we get out to these situations, many times you're going to try to find out who the leader is or the head of the group and try to talk, peacefully. But again, our job, we are law enforcement. We are public safety. Our job is to enforce the law. If people are committing vandalism, they're committing batteries, if they're trying to burn things, those are all violations of the law. And we have to step in and enforce the law, because if we don't, then we have lawlessness. And then it becomes, well, maybe that's okay that the sheriff or the police aren't going to do anything.
I would get that.
I think what we've tried to do is to stress peaceful protest, exercising your First Amendment rights, because as law enforcement, our job is to protect people's constitutional rights.
Correct.
To protect them from being victimized. And remember, that car that you're breaking up or you're breaking the windows, that car belongs to somebody. Somebody's the victim of that. Now, if it's a law enforcement vehicle, those are our taxpayers that have to pay to have this stuff fixed and or replaced. And so we have to, when we're out there, we have to take the emotion out of it. We are there, it has to be, okay, they're doing this, fine. We see them, they're peacefully protesting. Whether or not you would agree with them or not, that's not our call. Our job is to make sure they have the right to peacefully protest under the First Amendment.
Correct. We totally support that. And the escalation aspect of it, that's what's the importance part of that is when we see those scenarios go from, 0 to 60 in 2 seconds flat, now we have the attack of, officers. People just don't, I don't think that they're connecting the dots that this is an illegal action that you cannot do. If it's illegal to do it to you, there's even different laws that protect that versus a private citizen who's in that scenario.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Because what you're really talking about when you talk about mob violence, if mob violence turns towards, one person, say, and 3 or 4 people against one person, now you have a disparity of force.
Right.
Okay. In that disparity of force, it falls back still within Penal Code 197. Is there an imminent threat? Right? Imminent threat of death or great bodily injury likely to result in death, right? So at the end of the day, is it reasonable to expect you, the person who's being attacked by 3 or 4 people, to defend yourself in a physical way? That may not be reasonable. I don't know your skill sets, though. Right. You know what I mean? There are some people that have the skill sets that, can protect themselves in a physical way against, that type of disparity of force. That's not the average person. Right? So then it's going to fall back to, as long as, and there have been people who have become the aggressor, and as a result, in CCW permit holders, as a result of their aggression, they've had people confront, maybe multiple people confront them. So it's all going to come down to the facts and the circumstances that surrounded the situation, especially if there is a use of lethal force. So again, stay away from that type of a situation if you have the ability
If you
to
can,
escape.
yeah.
But if you find yourself, cornered and there's, multiple people coming at you and you believe that the threat is going to rise to the level of death or great bodily injury, the law supports a use of lethal force in that type of a situation. You're going to have to be able to articulate all the reasons why you did what you did, okay? Every use of force, whether it's a lethal use of force, a less lethal use of force, it has to be backed by your ability to, explain why you did what you did, okay? But one thing I want to talk about, too, before we step away from this, is the protection of your property, okay? Because if somebody starts damaging your vehicle is property. You do not have the ability to use lethal force to protect property.
You don't?
I'll tell you what, this is one thing that, people are like, what? I thought, if somebody was, trying to steal something from you that I could use lethal force.
We don't live in Texas.
Oh, that's not even that's probably think it's live with Texas, but I understand what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay, can be taken.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I want CCW permit holders to know that lethal force, you cannot use lethal force to protect property. Okay?
Correct.
Now, if that force or violence against your property, i.e., somebody's damaged your car with some type of a weapon or just jumping on top of it to cause damage, if that violence turns towards you and becomes an imminent threat, well, now we have a different situation.
Especially if you were in the vehicle.
If you're in the
somebody's
vehicle,
like swinging a
you have
baseball
no
bat.
avenue of escape,
Right.
Other than to potentially put the car into drive and drive off with that person either on your hood or trying to two other people trying to block your vehicle.
You have to be careful.
Yes, I've seen this play out a lot in the news where people are surrounding vehicles and not allowing them an avenue of escape. And while that vehicle is surrounded, a couple people out of that, the mob will begin some type of a violent act on the vehicle. But as it's playing out, it's very difficult to understand is that violence against the vehicle just acting out in a malicious manner, or is that violence intended to get through a secure barrier, which would be the door and the window, to attack the person on the inside, okay?
Yes.
And that's something, again, that the person who's driving the vehicle that may be the subject of the attack, you're going to have to be able to articulate whatever your actions were.
100%.
So,
100%.
And I think, Rick, you brought up a great point. I'll hit on it again about common sense. It's like if there's a protest going on in your community and you're obviously opposite the theme that they're protesting, don't put yourself. I mean, we all have our constitutional rights. I get that. But for your own personal safety, don't put yourself in a bad situation. I mean, if you're the antithesis of what they're talking about or what they stand for, walking out there and walking through that crowd and bumping into them and basically provoking someone
That's a good word.
is not what you should be doing. I mean, if you want to go stand on the opposite street corner and hold your sign up, and that's fine, you're a competing voice because this is all about people's voices getting heard, that's great. But common sense, kind of stay in your lane a little bit, because a very peaceful crowd could have some people who could, turn violent.
Yeah.
Very quickly, because if you look back, if we take the clock back a little bit, you remember we started seeing the buildups of the whole Palestinian movement over on Shepherd and Blackstone, right?
Blackstone and Knees, yeah.
Blackstone and Knees, sorry. Thank you for the correction. So we see the flags way extending over into the street. Like, it's not even a flag at this point. It's more of an extension pole of PVC pipe with Palestinian flags. And it is actually blocking views of cars turning right at P.F. Chang's, right? So the person can't see where they're going because they've got this big Palestinian flag sitting in front of it. But then what you start to see is, in the very beginning, is you saw Israeli people in that culture that were standing on the opposite, on the In-N-Out Burger side, okay? But then you start to see the migration of the Palestinian side protesters going over there and causing issues with them and escalation, so much to the point that any person that was in support of Israelis' rights to defend themselves, they were being attacked and then they had to leave, right? So I'm talking about that escalation. We like the First Amendment right. We definitely want to exercise that. We want to exercise all of our rights to defend or to protect it. It doesn't matter because we believe in it.
I want to bring something up real quick, and not to derail you, but
okay.
I think it's something that has to be talked about, and it's the definition of voluntary manslaughter. Okay, voluntary manslaughter is a crime, and if you look at the portion of voluntary manslaughter as defined in the California Penal Code, a portion of it says that it could be, and I'm gonna throw CCW in there.
Sure.
A CCW permit holder, if they truly believe that they're defending their life in that moment, but based off of investigation after the fact, okay, it was found that the CCW's actions were unreasonable. You could believe 100% in that moment that your life is in jeopardy and you opt to use a lethal force action and you take lethal force and that lethal force results in a death. But based off of the facts and circumstances that came out in the investigation after the fact, your actions were deemed to be unreasonable. You could be charged with voluntary manslaughter, and a portion of that, a lesser included, could be an imperfect self-defense killing. So would you agree, Sheriff, that there's a fine line between an imperfect self-defense killing?
There absolutely is a fine line. I get this conversation a lot with CCW holders on a myriad of different topics. But one topic that comes into play, and I tell people this, is they'll say, hey, my CCW is expired, but I still want to carry. And I'm here in Fresno County, and I'm in the city of Fresno, and I know that I'm a good, law-abiding. And remember, you don't have to. I issue CCWs to residents, people who aren't citizens.
Thank you for your support of the Second Amendment.
Thank you.
I do.
I'm a huge fan of yours.
I do issue to individuals who are not citizens that are legally here. They can get a CCW. But what I tell people is now, by law, you are carrying a firearm loaded and concealed in your vehicle or on your person illegally. Somebody comes up to your car at an intersection and they start to threaten your life, or you feel threatened, and you end up using that gun. And I always say that, guess what's going to happen? When it goes to court, the individual that you shot, and whatever their circumstance is, whether they die or not, the first thing the plaintiff's attorney is going to say is, you were illegally carrying a firearm.
100%.
I said, so
Which is a crime.
getting
Yes.
your
In itself.
Yes.
getting your CCW and keeping it up to date and going through the training are all critical components.
Yes.
And it's part of the process, and it's the law. And this kind of goes back into the emotion and how people feel. Well, people feel like, meh, I've already had it for 6 years. Why do I, so what if I don't? Well, it's the law.
Yeah.
And if something happens, we're going to follow the law. And I cannot discourage you. I'm encouraging you to get your CCW and doing it right, because we live in a country of laws.
Yes.
So I got to circle back on this point exactly. I have people push back on me as a CCW instructor, and their point being, I don't have a CCW because once I take the class and I get certified, I'm now held accountable for the training and the laws that govern CCW carry, where if I just don't take the class, you can't hold me accountable because I'm not educated on the laws.
You'll be held accountable.
How in the world does that make sense? As the number one law enforcement guy in Fresno County who issues CCWs, I would love to hear your take on that. And I think that you just kind of covered some
Well,
of it.
I understand what they're saying about the legality of it, and that now, but remember, under the law, ignorance is not a defense.
No.
Ignorance is not a defense.
Exactly.
You went out and purchased a firearm, you're going to be held accountable. And I personally think that the CCW training, and I've had a lot of people come to me and say, oh, Sheriff, it used to be 8 hours for a new permit. Now it's 16. It was 4 hours for renewal. Now it's 8. And I didn't agree with the other parts of SB2 that they tried to impose, where all these places you couldn't carry it.
Right.
Sensitive
places.
Well, because now you're increasing the training, you're increasing everybody's knowledge base that gets these, but you're restricting all these places.
Makes
to me,
no
it didn't
sense.
sense. But what I told folks is I disagree with the restricted areas 100%, but it's hard for me to argue against giving you additional training, because ultimately, as a law enforcement officer, every 3 months, I have to go out and shoot and qualify with my firearm, okay? You as a CCW holder only have to show, and it's a lower standard to show proficiency once every 2 years.
Right.
So if we up that training once every 2 years, I'm probably going to upset some folks out there that...
A little bit.
But the reality is that that's a hard position to argue away.
Yeah.
Obviously, I stand 100% behind you that all these restricted areas was a complete push by people in our state government here to discourage people from getting CCWs because they are not pro firearms. They are not pro CCW. They may tell you they are. They may tell you they have a ranch in Montana or Wyoming where they go do all this skeet shooting and everything else.
Yeah.
But that's for them.
Yes.
Not for you.
Correct.
They go to the French Laundry to have dinner during COVID,
Or own the
but not you.
Yes.
So
Thank you
Oh
for
my
that.
gosh, that's great.
I
That's
appreciate-
so
I
good.
appreciate
one thing I want to touch on too is when we talk about the positively informed people. That was one of the segments here on the questions.
Yep.
One thing that I find throughout Fresno County and is misinformation.
You beat me to the next topic.
When
Yes,
when we took over police services in the city of Huron, we took over 24/7.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this was back in September. We had 2 deputies on every shift. We got a great response from the community out there.
Do you have a substation there?
No, they have their own police department,
Okay.
but there were some things that occurred where they did not have the staffing, did not have the personnel because people had left for other jobs outside of Huron, So we took over and we were doing 24/7. Now we've scaled it back a little bit. We're still doing more than half of the police services there. Everybody's been very happy with the service we provided. And there was some folks out there who had been misinformed and they were scared that, oh, sheriff's coming in. We've heard him speak on immigration and SB 54. Are they going to enforce immigration laws? And I have a good relationship with Ray Leone, the mayor out there. He called me one day. He's like, hey, we got to talk. He's all, we're a sanctuary city. And I'm like, that's great. I said, no worries. He's like, well, what do you mean? And I said, our deputies on the streets do not do immigration enforcement. That is not our job. And there was a bit of a pause. And I said, we comply with SB 54. And he's like, well, good. And I said, so they, if they commit these serious crimes, and he's like, oh yeah, if you get somebody for one of those crimes, yeah. I go, but it's not even our deputies out there. They have to go to the jail. They have to go through a portion of a legal process with the court.
Due process.
And then if Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as we call ICE, if they contact us and say, hey, John Zenoni's in custody and we know you arrested him for assault with a deadly weapon and he's been to court and it's gone through the process, we'd like to place a detainer on him. I told them that's when it happens. Even when that individual hits the jail, we are not allowed to call ICE and say, hey, John Zenoni's in jail. Do you want to place a hold on him? We don't even ask their legal status when they come into jail because we just don't based on the law and based on SB 54. So to me,
Just process.
it was this sigh of relief, that, oh, you're like, no. You see us out. We're out on the west side of Fresno County, which is referred to as sometimes the Golden West Side with all the agriculture and industry out there.
Absolutely.
Our deputies on an hourly basis probably drive by individuals working out in the fields, farm labor contractors and other people. Well, there are individuals here that are undocumented. That is not our concern.
Right.
If a crime occurs, then we respond to take care of the crime. And I always tell folks, if you're the victim of a crime and you're a witness to a crime, and even if you're the suspect, nobody from the sheriff's office is going to ask you what your citizenship status is, whether
That's
you're here
key.
legally
That's
or
key.
whether you're here. That's not our concern. In fact, if you're the victim of a crime, and we've had this happen, and you want to report a crime because that's our job,
Right.
is to protect you. And we can even help you apply for a U visa to protect your status here.
I had no idea
during the
that U
course
visa
of the criminal
That's
case.
new. Yeah, I didn't know that. It's
And
new to
one
me.
thing that people have to understand, and we learned this, really drove it home during the MS-13 case, which was Blue Inferno, back in, 2020, 2019, 2018, somewhere in there. Individuals who are here illegally, who are part of MS-13, committing these murders and
Heinous
these machetes and all these violent crimes, we found out that they were more likely to target individuals they felt were undocumented because they knew they were much less likely to report these crimes to law enforcement.
Based off
And
of
so-
the possibility of being deported.
Right, and that's what I tell folks
that's
is we
fear-based.
are not going to ask you.
Yeah.
If you are here undocumented and your daughter's in high school and you believe she might be the victim of human trafficking or something like that,
Yeah.
or being targeted for it, call us. Nobody is going to ask you that question. I've said this at town halls and forums. No, we are here to protect you and to protect your daughter from being victimized and to make sure that that suspect or that perpetrator is brought to justice and held accountable. Now, if that perpetrator is undocumented and illegally in this country, and so and behold, this arrest and this criminal proceeding results in them being turned over to ICE,
So be it.
so be it, because your family's protected. That's our job, is to protect your family and get you justice.
That's awesome.
So along the lines of misinformation, okay, this hits on both sides. We know that the information that need to be accurate is vital. I think the big misstep in our society, no matter who the finger you want to point at, is how does that person properly educate themselves in facts, not emotions? Where do they go? Do they go to a government website? Do they go to a county website? What do they do? What do they do on both sides of that spectrum?
I would recommend that. Prior to coming in here today, I didn't know everything about ICE. I didn't know that their mission changed in 2003 after 9/11. So I did some research, but do some research on what what a lot of these federal law enforcement agencies do. Go to the FresnoSheriff.org and look at what we do. Go to the city of Fresno. Look at what our job descriptions are. And
You talk about self-education.
yeah, so
Don't wait to be educated by an LE agency or the situation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's a wrong education.
Yeah. Seek out the knowledge on your own, and and I got to circle back too on the CCW portion. When you go through a CCW class, those are the bare minimums that are required by the law for you to get a CCW. Okay.
Do you find that people think that is an
all they have to
above
do.
standard?
No,
that's
this is all I have to do.
Yeah.
Well, technically, it is all you have to do. But if you want to be the best CCW carrier, you want to be the best defensive handgunner, you seek out more information.
Correct.
And you continue the knowledge base and the training after the fact.
You become a student.
Completely.
Yes.
Over the 2 years. If you're the CCW that goes through the class, never breaks out the lesson plan, from the point that you got the CCW to the 2-year renewal mark, and you don't re-educate yourself on the laws and those types of things in between, or you don't go to the range and you're not proficient with your firearm. And we talked about this in our last podcast.
Yes, we did.
Are you actually more of a help, or are you more of a hindrance, either to yourself or the public in general? And the answer to that is, you're riding a thin line.
So now now there's a question mark on the help or hindrance part, and then we inject that scenario where you've got mob aspects, and you've got that kind of person in that situation, right?
Yeah.
I've got 5 people, now there's 20 people, and you have a person that hasn't even touched their pistol and gone out and become proficient in their shooting. And now they're in a situation that they've got to assess the threat and how they're going to respond. To me, that's just bonkers.
Well, and that's becomes dangerous for the CCW holder. That becomes potentially dangerous for others because, as we talked about earlier, once you fire those rounds, you're responsible for every round that comes out of that gun that you pulled the trigger on.
Yeah, and your ability to articulate why you did what you did and knowing the basis of the law that supports it, that's pretty important stuff. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you don't even know, Penal Code 197, you can't recite the elements of Penal Code 197, how it related to your use of force, how are you going to justify it in the first place?
One thing, Rick, you brought up earlier, you talked about escalation versus de-escalation. And I've had conversations with a lot of our elected officials back in Washington, the ones locally back in Washington, D.C., and we've talked about some things. And when you look at some of the 2 major incidents in Minnesota, like obviously you're out there, you're carrying a gun, it's very volatile, it's very fast-moving, it's very fluid. But one thing that we teach, and I know the Fresno Police Department does too because I've talked to Mindy Casto and their staff over there, we teach a lot of de-escalation tactics.
I've seen it.
And so you take someone pulls up in a car in front of you, and they're sitting in their car. We won't say any names. We'll just go with this scenario.
Sure.
They're sitting in their car. I don't know, what crime have they committed? Potentially, they're obstructing you. They're obviously out. They're protesting. They're taking it up to a little bit of a different level. But our tactic is what's that person wanted for? Okay. Well, they're obstructing. It's a low level misdemeanor. And at that. Are we gonna rush up on their car? No, we don't train that. And I'll give you an example. We had an individual who was wanted. He had a warrant out for his arrest. It was signed by the court, felony warrant. He had been on probation. He violated his probation. Our deputies were watching him. He left the house, and he got in a car with a female and I think it was a 5-year-old kid in the back seat. He's wanted. The judge has signed it. He's a felon. He was on felony probation. We have every right as law enforcement to go over there and effect an arrest on that individual.
Absolutely.
Okay. But knowing that he had some violence in his past,
Okay.
do we really want to put the female and a 5-year-old child?
Is that the best timing?
Right.
For the,
So they leave the house in a car, and it was over, I think, somewhere in West Fresno. And they drive. Could we pull them over and make a vehicle stop? Yes. But we also know, too, that that individual could say something, maybe has a gun. I don't know. I'm just saying. And then you get in a pursuit, and you got a 5-year-old kid in the backseat.
Right.
So what do? We surveil, we wait. He gets out at a McDonald's near Dakota and Cedar. Once he's out of the car, away from them, they're not endangered.
Let's go.
The team moves in and takes him into custody.
Yeah.
So those are things that you have to think about. And I just want to transition back briefly is ICE has hired a lot of people in the last year.
And are still hiring.
Right. $50,000 bonus and all that. Mm-hmm. You know, our deputy sheriffs that they want to go out and work on patrol, not the ones who work in the jail or the courts, but the ones who work out on patrol. They go to a police academy over at Fresno City College, which is about 6 months long. Mm-hmm. After they graduate the police academy, they go through our field training program, which is anywhere from 16 weeks to 18 weeks. So we're talking 4 to 5 months. So they're getting over 10 months of training just to be able to go out on their own and work patrol. I can't say the same is happening with some of these other agencies. And I think sometimes when you hire people in mass, you've got to train them and, you know, and I think sometimes we've seen this in our own agency. When you hire a lot of people and you're trying to fill all those vacancies, when you got a lot of vacancies, sometimes, you know, like, hey, Rick's a great candidate, we're hiring him. John, you know, he's kind of barely there, we take him. And sometimes it works out great, sometimes it doesn't. But there's always some collateral damage to this. And I think that training is a big component in teaching people de-escalation. Now, if you're ICE agents and you're going up to a house to effect an arrest or serve a warrant, and somebody runs in front of you and blocks you on the way to the door, or they physically grab you and say, don't go, then you have a situation where you're going to take immediate action.
Have to.
I don't want to get into all the details of it, but I think there's sometimes you can avoid using force even when maybe legally you have the right to, but it isn't the best interest of the entirety of the situation.
The facts and the circumstance. And by the way, I'm not sure
we got a hard break, guys. Okay. We got to you know, give ourselves to recharge here. So we'll be right back, you guys. We're going to continue with Rick when we come back.
Are you ready to become the strongest version of yourself, Alpha Men? Meet Paul Watson, a military veteran. Paul knows the importance of physical fitness, mental and physical toughness, and the role it plays in one's overall health and well-being. That's why I'm proud to recommend Warrior Fitness, a fitness program designed to help you become the strongest version of yourself. Whether you're looking for elite military selection training, including endurance and strength training, group classes, individualized training, and personalized diet plan development, we're here to help you achieve your fitness goals. Our experienced trainers understand the value of hard work and perseverance, and they will work with you to push your limits and achieve new heights. Join our community of warriors and take on a new challenge that will help you to build strength, increase your endurance, and improve your overall health. With Warrior Fitness, you'll discover a new sense of discipline, resilience, and pride. Sign up today and let's take on the challenge together. Check them out at their Fresno location at 8039 North Cedar Avenue, Fresno, California, 93720, or on the web on Instagram and Facebook. Or if you want to just give them a call, go ahead, 559-242-2570. Stay Alpha.
Well, thanks for coming back and checking in on with us. And this, it's really a heated story. It's not heated between us, but it's a heated topic. And we want to circle back to Rick. And you were touching on a point earlier, and I had to cut you off there. But go ahead and fill everybody in on what you were trying to communicate.
Well, a couple things. One is that you brought up the academy. And I'm lucky enough to be an instructor at the academy. And I teach the firearms component, the live, the qualification, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that we do teach is de-escalation. We also teach a verbal challenge. So it's not coming out of the holster and initiating lethal force. We teach cadets how to initiate a verbal challenge, give, verbal instructions, de-escalate if you can, and only if it rises to the level of lethal force, then you do, use your firearm. So thank you for bringing that up, because that absolutely is taught at the academy. Before you judge a police officer's actions, know, and I'm going to read this because I think it's important. It's the objective reasonableness standard. And it's part of Graham B. Connor. And these are the considerations that I want people to keep in mind when you want to judge a police officer and the action they took and the type of force that they used. One, the severity of the situation. It's the level of threat posed by the suspect or the circumstances surrounding the encounter. So that's to the officer, not to somebody sitting on their couch at home watching the news.
Correct.
Okay?
Correct.
So I want to make sure that is completely understood. Two, immediate need for action, the necessity for quick decision-making in high-pressure situations. If you've never had a job or never been a police officer and you don't know what it's like to have to make split-second decisions on whether or not your life is going to be taken or somebody else's life is going to be taken, maybe you're not the one to be judging this type of a situation.
Correct.
Okay?
100%.
Just, something else to take into consideration. And then the information available, the knowledge and the context the officer had at the moment of the incident rather than what was known later, which is hindsight. You can't judge somebody based off of, a news episode, off of a video, that shows an angle. And because the officer...
Perception.
The officer may not have had the same, angle of view or... was aware of those circumstances that came out after the fact. It has to be based on what the officer's knowledge was at the time of the incident.
What they're facing.
Without the use of hindsight.
Yes.
So, it's easy to judge from a couch.
Yeah,
and
all the time.
I think a great scenario with that is an officer's, involved in a situation where somebody's a suspect in a shooting, and that suspect points a gun at the officer, and the officer returns fire. And after the fact, they go, well, the gun was empty. You didn't know he'd already fired 10 rounds. He was empty. But that's how some people think. Like, oh, well, the gun was empty. Why
Are you saying criminals abide by the 10-round?
Yes, they do.
No.
They don't. I'm joking, folks. Please, I'm not being serious.
I'm just throwing it out there.
I got you. But I want to finish this off by saying this standard, the objective reasonableness standard, aims to provide a consistent framework for evaluating police conduct, ensuring that decisions are made based on an objective criteria rather than personal biases or subjective interpretations.
I like that word,
Okay.
interpretation.
Yeah,
That's the careful word.
It's a crucial aspect of ensuring accountability in law enforcement practices.
Wow.
To me, that's deep.
Yeah.
That hits hard. When I read those things, I hope that you viewers are listening to this and do yourself a favor. Go look up, Graham V. Connor and look at the elements of it and look how, officers are judged and what standard is used for that. So it's...
Unfortunately, we've talked about so many different topics in the subject matter, but we understand this is that once you become responsible because you properly trained yourself or you've properly informed yourself, now you have the ability to be held accountable because now you know, right? And so what I feel like the disconnect between our society, law enforcement, the issue that we're talking about is they don't want to properly inform themselves because they just want to believe the clickbait, the quick reference on the 5 o'clock news, person harmed, yanked from their home, children, all these different, hook words that people get. But that right there, that's solid information that says this is what it is and this is what it isn't. Now I'm armed with that information and how I have to respond according to not what I feel, not what I think, but what I know. That's
what the officer knew at the time that they took the action that they took.
Right.
100%.
That's what you need to consider.
Yes.
Is, the officer doesn't say, time out, there's a weapon involved. Let me go view a video that somebody took on their phone before I decide on what I'm going to do about that weapon being present. So something to consider. One of the questions that you had in here for me, and this is I'm in my portion on this, unless we go a little bit further, but it says, what do I feel my responsibility is in the instruction of CCW weapons and license holders locally? Okay, I take my job as an instructor, a CCW instructor, very, very, very heavily, very deeply.
I can attest to this 100%. I've taken time with this man to go and get trained. No joke.
So for me as a trainer, this is not a money grab. This isn't a dollars, type situation. This is I feel a passion for training people, good people, to possess firearms.
Law-abiding people.
Law-abiding people, and to be, the countermeasure should a bad guy with a gun present themselves. Because if you put a bad guy in the gun with a situation, who takes out with a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And law enforcement does a great job of responding, but the average response time in Fresno is going to be somewhere between 7 to 15 minutes for law enforcement response.
It's probably a little less than that, but
okay,
it depends
somewhere around there.
If you're in the city, it's probably
average.
3 to 5, and us we're probably 5 to 7 minutes on a priority one. Sometimes you get out in the big rural areas, it might be a little farther.
Okay. So either way, we can agree that there's a period of time where you have to defend yourself potentially until the police get there.
Right.
Correct. Yes.
Correct.
Okay. And I'll bring up an active shooter situation. How much killing can happen between 3 to 5 minutes?
A lot.
A lot of killing can happen. So you put a good guy in the equation with that gun, who is emotionally stable, who has the knowledge of, the laws, who is proficient with their firearm. That individual, that CCW permit holder, is going to save a lot of lives.
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
That's a huge reason why I do what I do. Okay, because ultimately, I could be potentially somebody who's assisting in saving lives. So
correct.
Yeah,
correct.
And like I said, I take my job very seriously. You come to one of my classes, you will go out of there armed with information, and not only that, but when we go up to qualify on the range, I start teaching a defensive practical,
yes, sir.
From a defensive practical standpoint. This is not stand 10 toes on the line and poke holes in targets. This is how do I win in a gunfight.
So you mean we're not standing there waiting for our target to line up and stand still, wait for me just to hit center mass? That's not
we
what
do
we're
cover
doing?
the fundamentals of marksmanship because it's required as part of Senate Bill 2, but we go a little bit deeper than that. We get into defensive handgunning mode, the mindset and those types of things.
So we're aiming for shoulders and legs, right? We're just gonna
we're shooting to stop the threat is what we're doing. We're shooting
We're shooting to stop the threat, neutralize the threat.
I agree with that. But we also hear that rhetoric that, he could have shot him in the shoulder. He could have shot him in the leg, all these different scenarios. And I'm like, until you're in an intense decision-making process that takes seconds to make, you'll never know what that's like until you're actually in it and have to assess what is the proper response to that situation, right?
Yep.
So let's think about this. So we've covered all these different aspects of this. Sheriff, just to kind of wrap this whole thing up, do you have anything that you genuinely believe that we need to get communicated out there to the public?
Well, I think there's two things, and I'll finish on this. And it becomes difficult for law enforcement, especially in California.
Okay.
Because we have SB 54, which is a state law. And when we get sworn in, we swear in our new people, whoever it may be, we raise our right hand, and we promise to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of California. Mm-hmm. That becomes somewhat difficult when two start to conflict, when they become in conflict with each other.
Correct.
Because now I have to hold SB 54, and I'm also supposed to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the laws related to the United States government and the laws related to the state of California. But now those two sets of laws and things become in conflict. So that becomes a bit more difficult, and that's why we have this dance with SB 54. Mm-hmm. What I want to let folks out there know is that, there's 58 sheriffs across California, 58 counties. And we talk about SB 54, and everybody's like, oh, well, you can't do this, you can't do this. People are looking to see if it's being violated. But yet, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is not subject to SB 54 guidelines. Every time that legislation has come up, I've been told it's been vetoed by our governor. And so they are able to communicate with ICE. And when individuals are being released from prison, CDCR is allowed to contact ICE, say 3 days in advance, as an example, and saying this individual is going to be released on Friday morning at 10 a.m. And they're there to pick them up for a transfer. Now, someone will say they're all sentenced, and they're all people who have gone through the court. But reality is, under AB 109 and some of the other provisions of California, we have a lot of sentenced inmates in our own jail. We don't keep people for 1 year anymore. We keep them for multiple years. So why is there a difference? Ask yourselves that question. Why are they allowed to, with the permission of the governor, and we are not, and we are restricted? In my opinion, this is not in the best interest of public safety and keeping our community safe, because we're talking about criminals. And lastly, that's one example of a broken system. Another example of this broken system is we had an employee who was a correctional officer. He had a work visa. He got hired as a correctional officer. He passed a law enforcement background. He went through the whole process. He came on board. He worked for us for not a year. It was less than a year. The process to get his work visa renewed takes so long, it ended up expiring. And per the county rules, emotionally, I feel like I shouldn't have to let this individual go. But per the county rules, because I have to follow the rules and the laws, we had to let him go.
Wow.
It's a travesty.
He's a correctional officer.
Yeah.
He's filling an essential job. He's passed a law enforcement background. I assure you, he's one of the good guys. But he works for me. So fortunately, I was able to contact one of our congressmen, and we're working on getting his work visa renewed because we need correctional officers. It's been a tough position to hire for.
Yeah.
So we're trying to expedite this. But had he just worked for someone outside of law enforcement, didn't work for the sheriff of Fresno County, he would just be falling to the wayside in that line to get his work visa renewed, worried about, hey, are they going to take some action against me for immigration purposes? But this is where it's broken, because this individual is paying taxes. He's paying his retirement. He's serving a role in law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And I can't even help him keep his job. I'm going to try to help him get his job back, and I've done everything I can, and he's very grateful for that. We're protecting criminals that come into our jail. I can't contact ICE, but yet I can't help this individual who's out there trying to achieve the American dream and doing it absolutely the right way.
Absolutely.
He's working in law enforcement, his background's solid, but yet he had to lose his job because our system is broken on these two fronts.
horrible.
And that's my message out there is get the facts, talk to your elected officials, because if we don't fix this, we're still going to have this huge divide because people don't understand what's going on. And our elected leaders need to come to the table and do what's best for people, not citizens, but people in this country. And that is hold the criminals accountable and help the good folks who are here working hard, chasing the American dream, achieve the American dream. Because if we have more of those folks and we get rid of the criminals,
Absolutely.
we will have a better United States of America.
I completely agree with that.
Agreed.
Rick? Yep.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us on.
That was really good. We appreciate that. Everybody, please like, subscribe, follow, share. Definitely be looking for us. We're on Amazon now. You can definitely go to, if you have any questions, and when I say questions, I don't mean attack, Sheriff Zenoni's email or anything like that. I'm just saying that if you want to inform yourself, please go, FresnoCounty.gov. Is that what we want to do, Sheriff?
FresnoSheriff.org. FresnoSheriff.org.
Okay, so we're going to go on an org route. And then if you want to get information about training, anything related to a CCW, become a better shooter, just learn the basics of firearms, Rick?
Yep, you can reach me on Google at Freedom Firearms. My website is freedomfirearms.info. I am on Instagram at Freedom Firearms 2024. And you can find me on Facebook if you just look me up under Rick Field, and that has a direct link to my Freedom Firearms Facebook and Instagram. So,
and you can also find him on our landing page because his link is there as well. But I want to thank you guys so much for
having
coming
us,
in.
Jimmy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, always be a hard target to kill. Stay alpha.
Hey, Alpha Men, if you're enjoying the show, check your comms and look us up at amenpodcast.cc, where you can find all of your favorite shows and new releases. Stay alpha.